The mud bubbled up from the culvert like something out of a horror movie, thick, brown, and reeking of human waste. I stood on the edge of my creek, or what used to be my creek, as black sludge oozed through what had once been crystal clear water, now turned into a cesspool running straight through the heart of my land. HOA trucks had just driven off, laughing like they'd just pranked a neighbor with a harmless joke. They had no idea that by dumping sewage into my creek, they hadn't just destroyed a piece of land, they had set off a chain reaction that would drown their entire neighborhood in a swamp of their own making. You ever seen karma in the shape of a rising water line? I didn't buy the land for the house. I bought it for the creek. 26 acres of tangled pasture, twisted oaks, and that winding silver ribbon that cut through the soil like a living thing. The house was secondary, a faded cabin I rebuilt from its bones with my own hands. But the creek, that was the reason. It had a name on the old survey maps, Cedar Run, but the neighbors called it Ellis Creek, after me. It didn't belong to me legally. Not all of it. But everyone knew who took care of it. I cleaned it, mapped it, monitored the flow like it was a living vein. When beavers dammed it too high near the south bend, I built a notch system to balance the water without disrupting their habitat. When droughts hit, I rerouted the rain catchment systems I'd installed years earlier so groundwater could still feed the stream bed. I kept invasive cattails in check, logged animal activity with motion cameras, and maintained a trail of stone steps where kids from the neighborhood used to come catch frogs in the summer. People might not understand it, but that creek ran through me just as much as it ran through the dirt. What they also didn't know, or maybe didn't bother to learn, was that Ellis Creek didn't just meander for show. It served as the main runoff channel for the entire neighborhood's stormwater. Every single house built along the southern ridge of Hawthorne Ridge Estates had their rain gutters, sump pumps, and drainage ditches tied into that one watershed, engineered to flow gently south through my property and exit beneath the old county culvert into the state wetland reserve. That system, one I helped draft improvements for over a decade ago, kept the entire subdivision from flooding during seasonal rains. The county knew it. I'd presented at planning commission meetings with charts and sediment studies. I'd filed maintenance easements. I even hosted bird watchers during migratory seasons. But the HOA? They didn't care about maps or runoff zones or the fact that frogs only return to healthy waterways. They cared about property value aesthetics. And according to them, my stretch of creek made the neighborhood look low income. It started subtly. The new HOA president, a woman named Karen Lorman, yes, actually named Karen, no irony lost on me, mentioned at a community meeting that the ditch behind Mr. Ellis's property was unsightly and could be attracting snakes and vermin. I laughed when I first heard that, not publicly, just in the way you laugh when someone suggests a fire hydrant is too red. That ditch she talked about was home to 3 protected amphibian species, served as a native corridor for pollinators, and handled thousands of gallons of runoff during the spring thaw. But Karen didn't see that. She saw cattails. She saw dragonflies. She saw the wilderness as something messy, and she didn't do messy. Within 2 weeks of that meeting, I received a letter from the HOA citing me for failure to maintain common property visual standards. It included blurry photos of overgrown creek banks and a polite demand to restore visual harmony. I sent them back a copy of the county waterway easement, my state-level habitat certification, and a 4-page letter outlining the environmental regulations protecting that corridor. I assumed that would be the end of it. It wasn't. That was just the warning shot. What I didn't know, what they didn't tell me, was that Karen had already put together a subcommittee to reassess drainage liabilities within the HOA. That committee, comprised of her yoga partner, a retired dentist who never left his air-conditioned home, and a man who referred to himself as a soil consultant but was really just a guy who sold mulch door to door, decided that Ellis Creek no longer served a necessary function. I found out when the trucks rolled in. I was tending to a section of my northern fence line when I saw the orange cones blinking near the far entrance of the subdivision. At first, I thought it was routine county work, maybe utility maintenance. Then I saw the logo. Not city, not county, but Hawthorne Ridge HOA Improvement Project. The excavator behind the fencing didn't lie. They were digging, ripping open the land behind Lot 72, where the natural slope of the hill met the main drainage junction. I watched as they broke open the sealed spillway and welded in a new steel junction box. I walked over. Calmly, I asked the foreman what they were doing. He glanced at his clipboard, shrugged, and said, "Redirecting surface flow. HOA request. Nothing major. Nothing major." Except the pipe they installed was a 10-inch main, sloped at a downward angle directly toward my property, aimed like a loaded gun. "That drains from the west retention basin," I said flatly. He didn't reply. I knew what that meant. That retention basin collected not just stormwater, but overflow from every gutter, culvert, and leaky irrigation system from 50 homes. They were rerouting it straight into my land, without a permit, without notice, without consulting the county or the environmental board or, hell, even gravity. My creek wasn't equipped to handle that volume, not without backflow, not without damage. And worse, the water quality from that basin was suspect at best. I knew because I'd tested it. That night, I reviewed the soil readings I'd taken after last winter's overflow. They showed elevated nitrate levels, residue from lawn fertilizers, and bacteria counts that flirted with the limits of safe gray water, not outright sewage, but close. And with the HOA's new eco-cost initiative, which Karen had touted proudly as reducing community sewer costs, I feared the worst. They weren't just redirecting stormwater. They were siphoning partially treated septic overflow from older homes into the retention basin, then dumping it into the creek, into my creek. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the County Environmental Division. The woman I spoke to sounded tired, overworked. "We've had a backlog," she said. "We'll send someone out for inspection, but it could be a few weeks." Weeks. I didn't have weeks. By the following Monday, I could already see the change. The water that entered my property wasn't clear anymore. It was murky, oily. Frogs had vanished. Fish surfaced belly up. The smell, faint at first, grew stronger with every sunrise. Karen sent another notice. This time, it accused me of obstructing community water flow, citing unauthorized landscaping and modified water features inconsistent with neighborhood design standards. She had the gall to attach a photo of the native willow I planted last year, the one that stabilized the creek bank, calling it invasive. I didn't respond. I drove to City Hall instead. I spoke with planning and zoning, water management, anyone who would listen. Most were sympathetic. All were powerless. "It's HOA-governed land," they said. "If it crosses your property, it becomes complicated." One man, a junior hydrologist, told me quietly, "They're making a mistake. That channel's critical. I've seen the floodplain maps. If you clog that artery, the whole subdivision's at risk." But Karen wasn't interested in science. She was interested in appearances. And apparently, in appearances, flowing water didn't look as good as concrete basins and turf grass. So they kept going. More pipes, more diversions. By week's end, they'd installed a second discharge point directly into the northern bend of the creek, buried under gravel so it wouldn't be visible from the walking path. It trickled at first, then surged. I confronted the crew on site. They handed me a typed directive signed by Karen and rubber-stamped with the HOA's seal. It referred to the work as routine watercourse optimization. Optimization. Like this was software. Like they were upgrading an app and not poisoning the land. I stood at the edge of the water, watching the oily foam bubble where once minnows darted. A dragonfly landed on a bent reed, its wings trembling. It looked at me, or maybe through me. And in that moment, I understood what this was. Not negligence, not ignorance, deliberate erasure. They didn't want the land to live. They wanted it to comply, to flatten, to match their spreadsheets and flyers and weekend open house brochures. But this land didn't work that way, and neither did I. The first time I smelled it, it was just before dawn. I'd woken to the sound of hydraulic whirring and metallic clanks, familiar, but out of place. The kind of noise you'd expect on a highway expansion not 20 feet from the back of your property. I rolled out of bed, threw on boots, and stepped out into the fog-draped air. The sound was coming from just beyond the tree line where the boundary fence dipped into the watershed. As I approached, the fog thinned, and the orange glint of hazard lights came into view. A backhoe was stationed directly over the embankment, digging into the soil where the HOA's runoff met my property line. 2 men in reflective vests were guiding thick black hoses into the trench, one of them barking orders over a walkie. I didn't need to get closer to know what was happening. I could already smell it. Not the earthy rot of swamp water or the sour tang of algae, but something sharper, fouler, the unmistakable stench of raw sewage. Thick, clinging, chemical and organic at once. My creek. They were piping septic overflow directly into my goddamned creek. I shouted, and one of the workers looked up, startled. The other ignored me entirely. I didn't step onto their side of the property line. I didn't threaten. I simply asked, "Where is that discharge line coming from?" The guy shrugged. "They told us to connect it to the neighborhood basin," said this was the outlet. I pointed to the patch of soil where the creek had naturally curved, now collapsed inward and choked with wet cement. "That's not an outlet. That's a protected watershed. You're bypassing every septic safeguard in the book." He blinked at me, uninterested. "Take it up with the HOA." Then he turned back to his partner. That afternoon, I filed formal complaints with the county's Environmental Health Division, Wastewater Management, and Planning Zoning. I attached photos, coordinates, documentation of the illegal bypass, complete with elevation maps showing how the runoff now funneled directly into my land. I heard nothing back for 3 days. In those 3 days, the water turned brown. Frogs that had sung through the night fell silent. When I walked the creek at dusk, I found the bloated bodies of fish washed ashore near the cattails, their scales dulled and eyes glazed over. The smell had worsened. I saw oily slicks, glints of black sludge swirling over what had once been gravel-clear current. It coated the rocks, it stained the grass. And on the 4th morning, I watched a raccoon convulse and die less than 10 feet from my back porch. It had been drinking from the water. I printed the photos, every one. I compiled my complaints and drove back to the county offices. The receptionist took one look and waved me toward a junior inspector named Ed Raskin. He looked 22 and terrified. "We're backlogged," he said, repeating the phrase like a prayer. "I'll try to escalate it, but with construction season and staffing cuts, I can't promise a quick inspection." I leaned forward. "This is human waste, Ed, not stormwater. If the county doesn't act, I'll call the state. You know what the fines are for unauthorized sewage discharge?" That got his attention. He took my folder and promised to investigate. I wanted to believe him, but I'd already seen what bureaucracy does to urgency. It drowns it. By the end of that week, the damage was undeniable. My lowest pasture was flooded. The water table had risen visibly, puddles forming in places that hadn't held moisture in decades. The roots of my old sycamore, which I'd planted when my son was born, had turned black and begun to rot. The creek was no longer a creek. It was a septic trench. I confronted the HOA board at their next public meeting. I brought water samples, dead frog specimens, photos, maps, and county code printouts. Karen, ever composed in her pearl earrings and powder blue pantsuit, smiled like I'd brought her a bouquet. "Thank you for your input, Mr. Ellis," she said, her voice polished and oily. "We'll take your concerns under advisement, but I must remind you that the drainage improvements were approved by a subcommittee vote and fall within our jurisdiction. The area in question lies within community easement zones." "That's a lie," I said, louder than I meant to. "The creek predates the HOA. It's a recognized waterway, and I have documents to prove it." She sighed. "It's not a waterway, Mr. Ellis. It's a ditch. And frankly, the unsightly conditions you've allowed to develop there have posed a greater environmental risk than any improvements we've made." The words hung in the air like smoke. People looked down at their laps, uncomfortable. One man in a blazer muttered something about personal grudges. I realized then that Karen had already framed the narrative. She'd told the community that I was resisting needed updates, that I was the one interfering with drainage, that my unauthorized landscaping had blocked natural flow. She handed out newsletters the next week calling my property non-compliant, claimed I'd created artificial obstructions with wild plantings and non-conforming retention landscaping. She circulated images of my erosion, control willows, and claimed they were invasive, attracting snakes, and damaging neighboring properties. One neighbor, a woman I'd helped fix her sump pump just last winter, now avoided my eyes at the mailbox. Another, who used to walk her dog along the trail behind my pasture, started crossing the street to avoid me altogether. They'd been told I was the problem, that I was trying to sabotage the neighborhood. So I tried diplomacy. I invited Karen to walk the creek with me. I offered to demonstrate the damage, show her the water quality changes, the pH shifts, the collapse of the beaver dam that used to regulate natural flow. She declined, claimed it wasn't safe to trespass on my property while a compliance dispute was underway. The next day, I received a citation for unauthorized signage. A hand-carved marker I'd installed near the creek, honoring the old name Cedar Run, had apparently violated neighborhood branding protocols. The week after that, a man in a clipboard vest showed up at my gate to conduct a drainage compliance inspection. He claimed to be a third-party contractor hired by the HOA. I asked for his credentials. He didn't provide any. When I refused him entry, he marked something on his clipboard and left. 2 days later, I got another citation: obstruction of community inspection personnel, with a fine, $800. The game was clear now. They weren't just rerouting water, they were drowning me in paperwork, citations, fines, lies. They were painting me as a rogue actor, a hoarder of land and water, a menace to their manicured streets and artificial lakes, all while their septic soup kept pouring into the soil I'd spent decades nurturing. I checked the flow rate near the culvert after a week of steady dumping. It had tripled. During a light rain, the creek now overflowed onto my walking trail. One corner of my pasture, once home to native grasses and a patch of wild violets, was now a marshy basin of gray water and bubbles. I could see the chemical sheens at the surface. My boots sank into sludge where dry earth once crunched. And still, the HOA sent letters. Failure to maintain aesthetic frontage. Disruption of neighborhood harmony. Non-conforming plant structures. I'd been turned into the villain of their fantasy suburb, and they were winning. But I wasn't out of moves. Not yet. I kept every letter, every photo, every dead animal, every time-stamped video of turbid water bubbling from their discharge line. They thought they could rewrite the land with pipe and paperwork. They didn't know that land keeps score. And so do I. The rain came hard that Thursday. Not a drizzle, not a shower, a deluge. Sheets of water hammering down from an iron sky, unrelenting and sudden, the kind of storm that turns soil to soup in hours and pushes every engineered drainage system to its breaking point. I stood under the tin awning of my back shed, watching the runoff stream through the grove like liquid panic. The trees swayed under the pressure, their leaves pelted into a wet mat, and the sky flashed violently every few minutes, white light burning through the mist. But the sound that unnerved me most wasn't the thunder. It was silence, the absence of the creek's usual voice. No babble, no gurgle, just the low groan of water pushing against blockage. I knew what that meant. Ellis Creek was choking. I threw on my rain gear and headed down to the lower pasture. The path that usually wound between patches of tall grass had disappeared. In its place, an ankle-deep film of moving sludge, brown, gray, and littered with foam. When I reached the culvert, my stomach dropped. The mouth was submerged. The steel gate I had welded in years ago to keep out debris had vanished beneath a wall of muck and refuse. I sloshed forward, fought the current, and pried up the inspection grate near the overflow outlet. Nothing, not even a trickle. The whole system was backed up. The poisoned runoff from the HOA's illegal discharge had coagulated in the creek bed, clogging the sediment layers with thick, nutrient-saturated waste. The water couldn't move. And when water can't move, it spreads. And when it spreads, it consumes. By dawn the next day, it wasn't just my land under siege. The subdivision above me, Hawthorne Ridge, with its stone entry sign and smug symmetry, had begun to rot from within. The low-lying homes near the western slope were the first to feel it. Their basements flooded, sump pumps failed, Foundation vents burped air bubbles like drowning lungs. That morning, I watched from my high ground as water swelled in waves across their yards, flooding patios and seeping beneath perfectly painted siding. The neighborhood's emerald green lawns turned to quicksand under the relentless pressure. Underground nests of field mice and displaced snakes were forced upward, clawing for dry refuge. By nightfall, those same rodents were squeezing into attics, dryer vents, and tool sheds. The creatures I used to see playing at the edge of my creek now scurried through Karen's decorative boxwood hedges. The irony was almost poetic. I thought maybe then, finally, they'd acknowledge the problem. But Karen, ever the PR tactician, went on the offensive. That Sunday, the HOA's monthly newsletter hit doorsteps in glossy color, with a front-page headline, "Ellis's non-compliant landscaping causes systemic drainage failures. My name, in bold print, plastered across a 4-paragraph screed accusing me of diverting natural flow, constructing unauthorized berms, and weaponizing natural water features to retaliate against community initiatives. Retaliate, like I'd built a damn dam overnight. She claimed I had intentionally altered sediment paths to redirect flood pressure onto the neighborhood, and warned residents to prepare for legal action should their property be further impacted by Miss Ellis's reckless modifications. I stared at the page for a full minute before laughing out loud. A dry, humorless laugh. She'd weaponized the flood against me. The same day the newsletter circulated, a white SUV with faux government decals rolled down my gravel drive. 2 men stepped out wearing matching Navy jackets, with the words, HOA Environmental Oversight Unit screen printed across the back. One carried a clipboard. The other held a DSLR camera. I met them at the fence line. The man with the clipboard cleared his throat like a drama teacher before an audition. We're here to conduct an emergency inspection related to hydrologic interference and non-compliance with community drainage protocols. I stared at him. You're trespassing, I said flatly. This is private property. He raised the clipboard with a flourish, revealing a document so heavily redacted and logo-stamped it might as well have been forged by a child. Under the authority of the Hawthorne Ridge Emergency Water Flow Containment Act, he began. I held up a hand. That's not a real law, sir, he continued, undeterred. We have reason to believe you've constructed obstructions that have significantly altered water behavior downstream. Downstream? I blinked. You're the ones upstream. Your people clogged the creek. You redirected a sewage pipe into a protected drainage corridor. You flooded your own homes. I didn't touch a damn thing. He scribbled something on his form. The camera guy snapped 3 photos of my overflowing pasture. I watched them leave, their tires spinning mud onto my wildflowers. That afternoon, I received a cease and desist order hand-delivered, stating that if I continued to impede water movement, I would face legal repercussions for property sabotage. Sabotage. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to win. They were trying to erase me. They'd crafted a lie so large, so institutional, that it swallowed the truth whole. But the land had already chosen sides, and so had I. I began documenting everything, every flow rate, every water sample, every photo of septic backwash bubbling through HOA soil. I set up 4 wildlife cameras at creek junctions to monitor animal migration. I logged frog mortality. I flagged changes in pH, oxygen saturation, nitrate density. I marked the water's edge daily, tracking how their effluent spread over time. I took thermal scans after dusk to capture the rodent migrations. And then I built a dossier. Not just of the damage, of the decision-making. I dug through HOA minutes, traced budget reallocations, cross-referenced meeting notes, and code variances. I found the contractor who'd installed the illegal discharge line. He didn't know I recorded the call, but I did. They told me it was stormwater, he said. Said the new line would just relieve overflow. I didn't ask questions. I got him to admit on tape that no city permits were filed, that the septic basin was tapped off record at Karen's direction. I found an email between HOA board members referencing my hippie swamp and how it would make a perfect scapegoat if it all goes sideways. I printed it all, bound it, 3 copies. Then the rains returned, heavier this time, 3 inches in a single night. The creek, or what was left of it, exploded. My fields were underwater. So was half the subdivision. Driveways disappeared. Landscaping ties floated like driftwood. Mailboxes tilted like sunken tombstones. I saw Karen standing in the middle of her yard, water up to her knees, her decorative lawn lanterns bobbing beside her like lost buoys. She was shouting into her phone, red-faced, gesturing in my direction. I couldn't hear her, but I didn't need to. She'd blame me again. It didn't matter that her own actions had turned Hawthorne Ridge into a marsh. She needed a villain. And I had the misfortune of being both right and nearby. But this time, I wasn't just a man with a creek and a conscience. I was a man with evidence, and when land starts to rot, the truth doesn't stay buried for long. The truth has weight. It settles into the soil. It leaches into the water. You can try to bury it, deny it, dilute it, but eventually it rises. Just like sewage. And on the morning I watched Karen's prized patio furniture float away on a brown wave of her own making, I knew it was time to stop playing defense. They wanted war? I'd buried better-funded opponents under the crushing weight of legal precedent. They just didn't know it yet. I didn't always live creekside. Once upon a time, I wore suits that cost more than Karen's monthly Botox budget. For 23 years, I specialized in high-impact environmental litigation. Corporate polluters, chemical runoff, oil seepage, industrial waste violations, you name it, I dismantled it in court. I once brought a class action suit against a multinational mining company and forced a $1 billion payout over arsenic poisoning in Appalachian water tables. I've seen worse than Hawthorne Ridge. But the difference was, those people knew they were dealing with a killer. Karen thought she was harassing a hermit with a gardening hobby. She had no idea she was poking a sleeping bear that used to make Wall Street lawyers weep in courtrooms. I'd retired early, bought the land, to find peace, to live by the water. But peace only works when it's mutual. And now, Karen had poisoned the soil, literally and metaphorically. The first call I made was to Professor Harold Durning, Harvard Law, retired. He taught me everything I knew about using science as a weapon in the courtroom. We'd kept in touch over the years. I sent him the dossier. 2 hours later, he called back. "They're screwed," he said, without preamble. "They've tampered with a protected watershed, altered public flow channels without permit, and discharged untreated effluent across property lines. That's 3 state violations, 1 federal, and a partridge in a pear tree. Do you want fire, or do you want nuclear?" "Nuclear," I said. "Then let's get to work." Next was Dr. Sarah Mendel, floodplain biologist and stream rehabilitation expert. She'd worked with me on a riverbank restoration case in Indiana and owed me a favor after I got her research admitted during trial, despite corporate pressure to dismiss her as an unqualified activist. Sarah drove in 2 days later, with a mobile lab and a waterproof drone. She surveyed the entire area, my land, the HOA development, the discharge points, the flooded backyards, everything. She took core samples, documented chemical saturation, and traced the contaminant plume upstream. Her verdict? This isn't just water mismanagement. This is ecological homicide. She photographed the beaver dam remains, cataloged the dead amphibians, and pointed out algae blooms near the new culverts. "That," she said, pointing to the creek's oily skin, "is nutrient shock. You don't get that from rainwater." Then I called Commissioner Louis Taggart, old dog. Still owed me a favor from the time I helped him bury a lawsuit from real estate developers trying to gut the Wetlands Protection Act. I didn't even have to explain much. "Ellis?" he grunted when he picked up. "Still making people cry?" "Trying not to," I said. "But someone's dumping sewage in my watershed." "That HOA still giving you hell?" "They don't know it yet, but they just gave me the match to light them up." "Good. I'll send a hydrologist to verify flow changes. You file the preliminary injunction. I'll make sure it sticks." Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed my cabin into a command center. The walls were covered in satellite imagery, hydrology maps, court documents, and photographs. I had time-stamped footage of runoff discoloration, drone footage of construction crews bypassing standard septic lines, email chains showing negligence and willful ignorance. Testimonies from 2 residents who privately admitted they'd been pressured not to speak up after questioning the drainage changes. One of them, a retired engineer, gave me a copy of a letter he'd sent Karen months ago, warning her the new piping could compromise the aquifer during heavy rain. She'd responded by threatening to fine him for disseminating panic-inducing misinformation. The day I filed the injunction, I wore a suit for the first time in 5 years. I walked into the county courthouse at 9:03 a.m. with 3 bound volumes. Evidence of unlawful watercourse modification and environmental negligence by the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association. The clerk who accepted the paperwork whistled when she saw the list of violations. "You're not messing around." "No," I said. "I really never do." The filing triggered an automatic halt to all further construction or water modification by the HOA. The judge, an old colleague from my early trial days, scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week. I didn't even need to subpoena the HOA. They were served by a uniformed officer that afternoon. I made sure it was public. I wanted Karen to feel the weight of her choices land like a gavel. That same day, I sent press packets to 4 local news stations, 3 environmental watchdog groups, and the regional office of the EPA. The headline practically wrote itself: "Creek Poisoned by HOA Dumping. Retired environmental litigator fights back." By morning, Channel 6 had a reporter in a raincoat, standing knee-deep in murky water, quoting from my report while gesturing to the flooded homes in the background. Karen refused interviews, but the HOA issued a carefully worded statement claiming standard stormwater improvements made with guidance from engineering consultants. I made sure to follow up with drone footage of their so-called consultants installing illegal junctions at 2 a.m. without permits. "Standard improvements don't require spotlights and secrecy," I told the reporter. She smiled. "You're going to be hell for them in court." "No," I said. "I'm going to be justice." Karen panicked. That's when the threats started. Passive ones at first. Vague legal letters from a boutique firm based 3 counties away, full of bluster but no teeth. Then came the smear campaign. They set up a website, creektruth.org, accusing me of sabotaging water infrastructure and waging war on suburban families. They included blurry photos of my property, suggesting I had constructed experimental dams to redirect flood damage. I laughed when I saw it. It was so desperate it almost felt flattering. But still, I documented everything. Every screen grab. Every fake claim. Every email from frightened neighbors who privately told me they were being told to watch what they say. One woman admitted Karen had threatened to deny her pool permit if she sided with me publicly. The closer we got to the court date, the more erratic they became. The final straw came when one of Karen's consultants trespassed on my property during a rainstorm, allegedly to take readings. My trail cam caught him opening one of my monitoring devices and dumping its contents into the creek. He was arrested the next day for unlawful entry and destruction of environmental equipment. When asked for ID, he claimed to be working under Karen's direct orders. That's when the judge issued the second injunction: a full cease and desist on all HOA activity within 200 feet of Ellis Creek. Violations punishable by daily fines. I could feel it in the air, the tide turning. For weeks, they'd painted me as a rogue recluse trying to hold a neighborhood hostage. But now, the evidence had flipped the script. Karen's face stopped appearing at meetings. Her allies stopped returning calls. The silence from their side was louder than any threat. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was showing the whole state how fragile their illusion of control really was. They thought they could rewrite nature with fake credentials and backdoor contractors. But the water never lies. And now it was speaking loud, dirty, and undeniable, and every poisoned inch of it pointed right back to them. They never saw it coming, not even when the first unmarked black SUV pulled into the HOA clubhouse lot. Not even when the marshal in the gray suit pinned a federal warrant to the front door, right beneath the carved wooden sign that read Hawthorne Ridge, a community of excellence. It took them a moment to register the weight of what was happening. And by then, it was too late. The inspections weren't local anymore. These weren't county workers or code enforcement stooges Karen could schmooze over brunch. These were federal environmental response agents, and they brought the full weight of the Clean Water Act with them. Their boots were still muddy from a Superfund site upstate. They didn't care about landscaping violations. They cared about felony-level watershed sabotage. And thanks to my documentation, they had everything they needed to declare Hawthorne Ridge a disaster zone in the making. The court date came quicker than expected. My motion for expedited review, supported by 3 state agencies and 2 federal declarations, was granted without opposition. The trial took place in a packed district courtroom with cameras stationed outside and news vans parked curbside like vultures waiting for a fresh kill. Karen arrived in a cream pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they regretted ever taking her retainer. The rest of the HOA board showed up, scattered and sheepish. The ones who hadn't already resigned in quiet shame now looked like they wanted to disappear into the floorboards. I wore the same Navy suit I'd worn to my last big trial before retirement. It still fit. Still felt like armor. And when I walked up to the witness stand with my files under one arm and my notes in the other, the courtroom fell silent, like they knew, instinctively, that this wasn't a man giving testimony. This was an executioner reading the final rites. The evidence was damning. Video footage of unauthorized excavation, side-by-side drone comparisons of the creek before and after the illegal drainage lines were installed. Water toxicity reports, with chemical signatures consistent with untreated septic runoff, thermal scans of rodent migrations, photographic proof of ecological collapse. The pièce de résistance was a signed contractor statement, under oath, dumb, that he'd been instructed to bypass county permits and divert drainage under Karen's personal direction. And then came the financials. Oh, the financials. Harold Durning presented them with his trademark surgical precision. A breakdown of HOA fund misallocations that revealed nearly 190 redirected toward unlicensed drainage work, consultant fees paid to fictitious companies, and kickbacks routed through Karen's brother's landscaping firm. It wasn't just negligence, it was racketeering disguised as beautification. By the time the prosecution rested, the judge didn't even let Karen's lawyers begin their rebuttal. He slammed the gavel with the kind of finality that only comes when the truth is too heavy to argue with. This court finds the Hawthorne Ridge Homeowners Association guilty of environmental sabotage, illegal discharge of wastewater into a protected waterway, and financial misconduct in the administration of community funds. The sentence was swift and devastating. Immediate dissolution of the HOA. Seizure of all HOA-controlled assets. Personal liability extended to all current board members, including Karen, to fund the full remediation of Ellis Creek and the surrounding watershed. A secondary ruling ordered the forfeiture of Karen's personal residence to help cover fines and damages totaling over $3.2 million. The courtroom gasped. Karen went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her attorneys didn't move. They knew it was over. The news broke within the hour. Suburban HOA, destroyed by environmental lawsuit. The headlines read, "From drainage to disaster. The collapse of Hawthorne Ridge." My phone exploded with messages from neighbors, some apologizing, some celebrating, most stunned into silence. But I didn't reply. I was already walking the creek, or what was left of it. Federal cleanup crews arrived the next morning. Bulldozers began removing the illegal piping. Soil reclamation specialists tested the ground for contamination levels. Within a week, the murky brown trickle was gone. The beavers came back first. Then the frogs. Then the great blue heron I hadn't seen in 2 years, standing like a statue at the bend near the willow tree I'd planted long ago. I rebuilt the walking trail. Replaced the signage Karen had ordered destroyed. I found the original Cedar Run placard tucked in the back of my shed, wiped off the dust, and hung it in its rightful place. The land healed, and so did I. Karen's house was auctioned at a loss. No one wanted it, not after what it represented. Not after the property was officially reclassified by FEMA as part of an at-risk floodplain due to compromised drainage infrastructure and illegal terrain modifications. The entire western half of Hawthorne Ridge was now labeled a Zone AE, a high-risk area requiring flood insurance rates that made the homes virtually unsellable. One by one, residents fled. Some sued the former board members. Some quietly vanished. The perfectly manicured lawns were soon overtaken by weeds. Nature reclaimed what arrogance tried to tame. And me? I did what I'd always done. I took care of the creek. Every morning I sat on my bench, the one near the bend where the frogs croak and the willows sway, with a thermos of coffee in my hands and the mist rising like memory off the water. The scars were still there, the broken pieces of pipe buried beneath the earth, the faded signs of rot, but so was the life, the return. The echo of water doing what it was always meant to do, move forward, clean and free. Some men fight wars, some men win them, and some men just wait, knowing that when the flood comes, only the truth can float.